Three, two, one. Ross Barnett, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
So, what was your childhood like, and how did this influence your later career and interests?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in natural history, science. I like to read a lot as a kid. My dad is a big birder. He sort of his background is geology, so he's always been interested in the natural world as well, which he's passed on. Um, and yeah, I mean, I grew up in the Highlands of Scotland, but I wasn't a very outdoorsy kind of kid, so I like to sort of stay inside, read, and watch nature documentaries. So maybe that's where I kind of got my appreciation of the natural world from.
What kind of books did you read? What were some of your favorites?
As a kid, lots of dinosaur books actually. That most kids go through a dinosaur phase, and I definitely
Yeah.
was one of those. I like maybe matured slightly out of it, but I'm not entirely sure. Um, what else? Yeah, I mean, we had lots of books growing up. Um, so I did quite widely. Uh, Local library was also really good,
Yeah.
um, and encouraging. So yeah, never short of reading material.
And what was your favorite dinosaur growing up, if you had one?
Oh, no, that's definitely a hard question. Um, I think it probably was something slightly deeper cut, something like Deinonychus, maybe. Like the before before Jurassic Park came out, um, and Deinonychus was the kind of platform for Velociraptor. I mean, Velociraptors are much smaller than they are
Yeah.
in the films, but they're about the size of something like Deinonychus. So yeah, that would probably be my favorite.
And how big were velociraptors in real life?
Uh, in real life, I mean, don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly sure that they were a lot smaller. So, you know, maybe sort of dog sized rather than
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
they are in the Jurassic Park films.
Yeah. And why do so many kids get so interested in dinosaurs specifically?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly not all kids. It's just, yeah, I think you have to be certainly, there's sort of various paths you can go down. One is the sort of football mad, outdoorsy, sporty kind of kid, which is very much not me. The other path is books and TV and dinosaurs. And yeah, I'd have to, my own kids didn't really have much of a dinosaur phase. I don't know whether I sort of scared them off that. But I think it's like with why kids love fairy stories. I think they like the appeal of monsters, especially monsters that aren't around anymore. And dinosaurs certainly fit that bill.
Yeah.
So yeah, the kind of big scary creature that you can learn about from a safe distance. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm weird in the sense that I was football and outdoorsy, but also dinosaurs. So I was a bit of a weird blend between both. Um, Going a bit deeper, what are some methods for analyzing ancient DNA?
So engineering as a field, I mean, it's very wide. So it sort of starts off in the 80s, um, looking at just the idea of, does DNA survive post-mortem for any length of time? Can we look at DNA from museum exhibits, from fossils? And so the first kind of studies were looking at museum specimens. One of the first papers that was published by Russ in 1984 was looking at the quagga, which is an extinct subspecies of plain zebra, which is a really interesting, cool pattern. Um, it looks like a kind of mix between a horse and a zebra, so some stripes, but also some plain colored coats. And so in the early days, they were looking at things like bacterial cloning, which is where you kind of introduce some bacterial vectors to DNA soup and see what they can take up, and then mess around with them a bit to try and make the DNA. And so that was successful, and that was the kind of first sign that you could really get DNA from things that had been uh, dead for over a century. And from there, it kind of ballooned until we had studies looking at kind of Egyptian mummies, at amber. I mean, this is very much
Yeah.
the inspiration for Jurassic Park. Real kind of science, just extrapolating on it. Um, So people were kind of, in the early days of ancient DNA, like late 80s, early 90s, there was a big kind of rush to see who could get the oldest, the longest, the first dinosaur, that kind of thing. And it all kind of came crashing down like a house of cards, because the problem with ancient DNA is that it's very, very easy to contaminate it. So a lot of these studies looking at supposed dinosaur DNA or supposed insect DNA from amber, what people were actually doing was just amplifying their own DNA. And because by this point, the human genome hadn't been mapped,
yeah.
assumptions were made and mistakes were made. And then it kind of all kind of realigned in the early 90s when we realized that this was going on, and some very influential papers were published saying, look, you need to minimize contamination risks. You need to be sure that you're extracting real DNA. You need to do a whole bunch of kind of checks and balances so that what you're getting is not just yourself being amplified. And after those papers came out, really there was a kind of resurgence of the field, increase in confidence in the results. And this is where we start to get real solid data that stood up. So looking at things like DNA from the Pleistocene, from the dodo, from moa, from all these kind of recently extinct species, and also the kind of first studies of our own ancestry, looking at DNA from Neanderthals, which came out in 1997, things like that.
Yeah. And whereabouts on the planet are the most discoveries found? Does it vary, or is there like one hotspot?
So the problem with DNA is that, like any chemical reaction, it's kind of affected by entropy and temperature. So
Yeah.
For a long period of time, the best places to get real ancient DNA is from the high latitude. So permafrost regions, anywhere where it's cold. Permafrost is great because it's permanently frozen soil. There's lots of it around, and it's often quite fossil rich. So places like Siberia, the Yukon, Alaska, they've all been very good sources of ancient DNA from the Ice Age megafauna, which were living quite healthy in those times, and have been incorporated into the permafrost as subfossil bones. So that's probably the best place. Yeah, inside caves as well has been another good place to look for ancient DNA. You have lack of sunlight, obviously. You have constant temperatures which don't fluctuate too much. And so in the kind of lower latitudes, that's where a lot of the ancient DNA work has been done, is on cave material. That's certainly the case with a lot of the Neanderthal work that's been done, Denisovan work, things like that. And then also museums as well. Museums are a great repository of ancient DNA from not just recently extinct, but also diverse populations of things that are still around, extinct populations of things that are still around as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Siberia. I'm just wondering about Antarctica. Have we found any cool things there, or is there just not much there?
So obviously Antarctica is not very kind of wildlife rich at the moment, although there have been some very good studies done on things like Adelaide penguins, which have their home in the Antarctic. And they nest on the coast of Antarctica, and I've been doing so for thousands, tens of thousands of years. And so some early 2000 studies looking at Adelaide penguins had really great data from well-preserved penguin bones, and were able to kind of dig down into the sort of layers of these nesting sites and find DNA from penguins from thousands of years ago as well, and look at change in population through time.
Yeah, and would there be any other potential megafauna in Antarctica from a long time ago, or is it only like birds and
I think
stuff like that?
so. With Antarctica, I'm not certain, but I think it's been frozen for millions of years. So certainly there are dinosaur fossils and other things there from a time period when it wasn't, but certainly over the time period where you can get viable DNA, which is only the last sort of million or so years, it's been frozen. So I think the kind of fauna that you find there is really just the sort of penguins and a few insects and fungi and stuff like that. There's not really a lot going on.
Yeah. And what about in the UK? Where have we found some cool things? Is it also in caves?
Yeah, so caves in the UK, there's not been a lot of work done on on faunal remains. But cave sites are good. I've worked on ancient DNA from Orkney, looking at the Orkney Bowl. People have looked at hyenas from some of the caves in the south of England, Kent's Cavern, Creswell Crag, some of the Welsh caves as well. I think people have looked at some sites there. And certainly, if you're looking at kind of UK ancient DNA, then southern England's probably the best place for it. You have to remember that back during most of the Ice Age, everywhere north of York was covered in glaciers. So that's kind of wiped the slate clean up there. There's not a lot of subfossil remains found north of Yorkshire. But certainly studies of later things like Neolithic humans, even medieval humans as well. There's been quite a lot of work done.
Yeah. Speaking of the Pleistocene era, could you tell me more about it? And for someone who might not know what that actually means, like what could be found in there and what the climate was like at the time?
Yeah. So the Pleistocene is just the kind of scientific name, geological name for what we understand as the Ice Age. And it's from around about 2 million years ago till about 10,000 years ago. And it's a really interesting time period. It's not just cold the whole way through. It's very dynamic. So you have these big kind of swings in climate from very cold, frigid, dry conditions, the kind of typical Ice Age we imagine, frozen tundra kind of area, to swings to these interglacial periods where climate's pretty much like what it is today. It's kind of not too cold. It's very temperate.
Yeah.
And these sort of swings happen fairly regularly all the way through the Pleistocene. And in fact, there's a lot of evidence to say that we're actually still in the Ice Age. The Holocene, the period, the geological epoch that we're in just now is essentially just an interglacial, which we're kind of lucky enough to be living in at the moment.
Yeah. And what was the apex predator of the Pleistocene era, if there is one?
Well, there's a few candidates. So it depends what region you're talking about. In the UK, there would have probably been cave lion or saber-toothed cat. In Australia, it would have been the marsupial lion. In North America, it might have been the short-faced bear or one of the saber-tooths, or even the American lion. There's if you go to some of the island ecosystems, places like Madagascar, top predator would probably be something like the giant busa. New Zealand, you've got the past eagle, Harpagornis. So yeah, there's just like in the modern world, there's different regions have different apex predators, different webs.
Yeah. Speaking of the saber-toothed cat, I read somewhere that their genome analysis revealed diurnal hunting behaviors and social structures that are atypical for felids. I was just wondering how we can determine animal behaviors from analysing their genome, and why is diurnal hunting an unusual discovery?
Yeah, so that's a paper that first author on. That was some of the work I did when I was a postdoctoral researcher in Copenhagen, looking at the saber-toothed Homotherium, which is the genus that's found from Africa to North America. It's less well known than the other saber-toothed genus, Smilodon, which is just found in the Americas. But Homotherium is very rare in the fossil record. And so we're very lucky to get access to a bone from this species from the permafrost regions of the Yukon in Canada. And when we did the kind of whole genome analysis of this, we were interested in looking at regions of the genome which were under positive selection. So we can use various computational methods to compare the genome of the saber-tooth to other kind of close relatives. So other biped carnivores, so things like hyenas, modern cats, some of the mongoose family as well. And we can see where things have been under selection in the genome and see if we can relate those to particular gene regions. And so what we found, and again, I'm kind of, I wasn't a major player in the actual analysis of the data. I did mostly the generating and some of the writing of the work. But what the bioinformaticians found was that the regions under selection are to do with kind of diurnal living. So things like genes involved with eyesight, with and things like that, which suggested that Homo was active during the day, which is quite unusual for cats, which tend to be kind of crepuscular. They're active at sort of dawn and dusk. Not many are normally active during the day. If you look at, places like sub-Saharan Africa, then you have large apex predators like lions, leopards, hyenas. They tend to just hang around doing not very much during the day, and they're only active very early in the morning, very late at night, just because that makes sense for them to hunt them. So the idea that Homo was active by day, as well as the genetic evidence that we put forward, there's also some evidence as well from the paleontology. So looking at the structure of the skull, particularly the endocast, so the kind of space where the brain would have been. Homo had very large optic bulbs, so that the parts of the brain that process visual information, which suggests that they did a lot of looking at stuff. So active during the day makes sense as well for that.
And what would be some reasons for them doing that specifically, if you could think of any?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to give anything more than a supposition. If you're to ask me to guess, then the area where Homo is living, that at the time period, you have an ecosystem that's full of large herbivores, so things like mammoth, woolly rhinos, bison, aurochs, lots of large deer, so Irish elk, all these kind of large animals. And we think from kind of fossil evidence that the Homo had a preference for young mammoths. So there's a fairly famous cave site in Texas called Pleistocene Cave, where remains of a den of Homo have been found, along with hundreds of teeth of young mammoths, suggesting that they've been brought there by the cats themselves. So, I think, why would it be active during the day? Probably because it was after baby mammoths, and baby mammoths were active during the day. That would be my kind of best guess, but it's just a guess.
Yeah, and did saber-toothed cats and cave lions, I assume they coexisted at the same time. Were cave lions hunting at night, and what were they hunting on? That was
our best guess. So cave lions are quite close relatives of the modern lions. We can think of them as essentially the sort of same kind of cat. They probably were crepuscular as well. Pride living, so in large groups, which is unusual for cats. Not many cat species are social. Cave lions, we know from kind of isotope evidence that they had quite a wide and varied diet. So things like reindeer, bison, even cave bears as well. There's some evidence that cave lions hunted cave bears, which are these large, extinct vegetarian bears that are found all over Europe and into northern Asia.
Yeah.
So I mean, cats as a whole are quite varied in diet. They're flexible, and they can hunt whatever's abundant and available at the time. So I don't think they would have been too picky.
Yeah, and you've mentioned a lot of different animals and megafauna that have existed in the UK in the past, which is just so incredible and fascinating to imagine. Like sitting here now, what caused them to become extinct? There's one group of people that say climate change, and then another group of people that say human hunting. What side are you on, and why?
I'm very much on the human side, and it is a very complex question. I just think that it's not just a hunting. That's just not because it would be impossible to hunt them to extinction. But humans are an invasive species outside of Africa and South Asia. We didn't evolve in deep regions. We didn't evolve in Europe. We didn't evolve in the Americas or Australasia. And we know that invasive species are a real problem in intact ecosystem. So I think it's certainly there was hunting. We have very good evidence for hunting of a lot of megafauna, things like woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, and all sorts of megafauna. But it's not just that; it's also the effect we have on habitat as well. So whether that's burning things down, cutting things down, we have commensal animals, domestic animals we brought with us as well. So we have domestic dogs and the effect that they would have had on the kind of young megafauna as well. And I don't think it really would have taken very much pressure to really decimate some of the extinct megafauna. Certainly, when we look at something like the woolly mammoth, if it was anything like elephants, we're talking about kind of 24-month gestation period, only having one young after reaching maturity, which takes up to a decade plus.
Yeah.
It's a kind of investment strategy which doesn't take a lot to really upset it, and so we wouldn't have to take too many individuals for the population. And then once populations start crashing, you have a whole bunch of unintended consequences that just sort of snowball.
Yeah. And how do we use the resources from these animals? For example, the woolly mammoth, maybe the woolly rhino, the Irish elk. Like, how do we use them?
Well, this is I guess it shows how smart the people were that lived then. These are not people that are different from us. They're Homo sapiens, exactly the same species as us, the same wants and needs and ideas, really complex societies, which have left, fantastic evidence of that in their cave art, cave sculpture. And so they weren't going to waste anything. They certainly, for mammoths, we have evidence that they used their bones extensively to build with. They used ivory for all sorts of things, for crafting weapons, for crafting art. Some of the most fantastic art we have from the Ice Age has been carved out of mammoth ivory. We don't have a lot of evidence of its use, but they would have certainly used the skin to make leather. They would have used every part, the hair, the dung. They would have used dung's a fantastic resource if you're living in an area without trees for starting fires. So I mean these were clever, intelligent individuals that would have taken every advantage they could of the animals that were living in the same environment.
Yeah, so we've gone kind of through briefly the Pleistocene era, and I was just wondering what the movement of kind of Pleistocene rewilding and de-extinction, like what are they and how these affect ecosystems if they're implemented?
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion at the moment about reintroduction and rewilding. So reintroduction is just bringing back species that have been locally exterminated. So in the UK, for instance, there's talks of reintroduction of things like lynx, wolf. There's been some recent stories in the past couple of weeks about bringing back moose or elk, as they're known in Europe, to the UK. And these are all species that have gone extinct in the past few thousand years, but are still found in the rest of Europe. So there's still moose in Scandinavia, there's still lynx in France and Germany. There's still wolves all over the place. And so that's a fairly easy thing to do because there are kind of source populations. And in the UK in particular, because we're so depleted of native fauna, I think there's a real argument that we would benefit from bringing some predators back for a start, but also some of the other herbivores that we've lost. So that's reintroduction, and we've done it already. We've been very successful with reintroduction of the beaver, reintroduction of the red kite, of the white-tailed eagle. There are real success stories in British conservation, producing lost species. De-extinction, rewilding on top of that. So rewilding is slightly different. So that's where you're looking at exterminations that have not left any surviving populations. So, for instance, we used to have aurochs in the UK until a few thousand years ago. And aurochs are the extinct ancestor of domestic cattle. We don't have any aurochs left. The last one died in 1627. So all we have are their descendants, which are cows and bulls. But the aurochs was an essential part of the ecosystem back then. It had, its place in the dynamic web that is an intact ecosystem. And so the idea of rewilding is say, okay, we can't reintroduce any aurochs because there just aren't any left. What would be the next best thing? Maybe we could use some form of cattle and just let them loose, and they'll do the same kind of ecosystem services that the aurochs used to do. And so rewilding as a concept is bringing back the kind of closest ecological analog to something that has been lost and seeing if we can restore the ecosystem services that the sound provide. And so there's places where they're looking at this. So in the Netherlands, they've set up a kind of, it's not really a park because humans are kind of encouraged not to go there, but it's a fenced area on some of the reclaimed land, and they've seen what happens when they release semi-wild cattle, semi-wild horses as well. So horses, the wild ancestor of the horse, Equus is extinct as well. We still have domestic horses, and they can be thought of as analogs for the extinct form. And so this site in the Netherlands, Osvaardersplassen, they've kind of just let things take their own natural course and see what happens. And what they found was a massive increase in diversity, in biodiversity in these regions, that just having some of these analogs around helped to restore the ecosystem to a kind of more natural state, which encouraged other animals to make it their home. So they had things like cinerated sculptures, which have been seen in the Netherlands for centuries, came back to Osvaardersplassen after they'd reintroduced these rewilding animals to the area.
Yeah, and what is de-extinction?
So de-extinction is kind of the next sort of stage. So where we don't have any of the same species and we don't have any close analogs, then the idea is, well, can we use ancient DNA and sort of genetic engineering technology to bring back things which are totally extinct? So things like the woolly mammoth or giant sloths or like Protodon, all these other kind of, or thylacines, for instance, things which have no close analog and which used to be found but are now totally extinct. And so there are potential ways to do this. Obviously, colossal bioscience have been in the news a lot recently with their claims for de-extinction of the dire wolf, which is an incredible, what's the right word? It's an incredible breakthrough, but it's not really it's not exactly what their publicity is saying it is. So it's an incredible achievement, but they're not really dire wolves, but they are kind of on the path to being there. So it's showing us that it's technically possible, but it's not all the way there yet. And I think we need to be very careful about the ethics of this kind of work. The costs that it takes to do it, whether that be better placed in conserving some of the surviving megafauna or mesofauna that we have that are in real trouble today. I mean, yes, we can sort of think about de-extincting the dire wolf, but we still have Ethiopian wolves, which are in a lot of problems. We have red wolves that are having huge problems. Painted dogs, all these dog species are in dire straits essentially.
Yeah, and how far into the future could it be possible to de-extinct things like the woolly mammoth? And what are the benefits of actually doing that for the ecosystem or for tourism?
Yeah, I mean, before about a couple of years ago, I would say you're talking decades into the future, century into the future. But with the way things have kind of moved with colossal and the kind of rate of research acceleration, I'm not quite so certain of that anymore. I think the idea with kind of mammoth extinction, if they're going to take the same route as they've done with the direwolf, so what they did there is we have the genome for the woolly mammoth as we have for quite a few of the extinct megafauna. And so you take the genome of your extinct animal, you compare it to its nearest living relative, or a close living relative. So with direwolves, it was grey wolves. With woolly mammoths, it will be Asian elephants. And we look for where there are differences. So where are the regions of the genome that tell the cell to be a woolly mammoth rather than to be an Asian elephant? And then you have to engineer those changes into a cell line. Then you have to introduce that cell line into an embryo, and then you have to carry that embryo to term, and then you have to have a live birth. So, I mean, there are many complex and demanding stages along the way. We've seen that some of those steps can be done successfully for direwolves, like Colossal have done. But I think technically it's more difficult with mammoths because Asian elephants are much more difficult species to work with. They themselves are not doing so great. They're endangered under a lot of pressure. They don't do all that well in captivity. They're social, intelligent creatures. They don't like to be kind of left on their own in unenriched environments. So I think doing kind of lab work on them would be ethically dubious at best. And certainly there's issues with, we've never even done in vitro fertilization on elephants because their estrous cycle and their sort of 24-month gestation period is not really conducive to tinkering. Really, it's very difficult to get an Asian elephant to produce another Asian elephant, let alone to get to produce a woolly mammoth. These aren't trivial problems that we'd have to deal with. But assuming that even that all that was done and we reduced, obviously we'd have to not just be one woolly mammoth, it'd have to be a whole small population of them. Because again, we know that they were social, like elephants are. They had their own kind of social, society, I guess. They had their own basics of culture, as elephants do today.
Yeah.
And if we even get to that stage, then I think it would be difficult to argue that they should be let loose. I mean, even taking kind of captive populations of animals and reintroducing them back to the areas they've been taken from are fraught and complex because captivity changes animals. They kind of lose their kind of wild instincts. They become sort of semi-domesticated. I mean, it's the first sort of step is just to isolate them and get them used to humans. So that is a problem. I think, if we got through all of these problems and we ended up with a population of woolly mammoths that were happy or modified elephants that had some woolly mammoth genes that were hairy and had curly tusks, then the benefits of kind of relocating them back to areas where mammoths were found I think the real reason would be to kind of restore some of that ecosystem. So when mammoths were around, there was a whole kind of swathe of Eurasia and North America that were a kind of steppe grassland environment. That's how these mammoths were able to live. They were able to eat these really nutritious grasses, and they themselves were, keeping trees in check. They were manuring the land, keeping it fertile, and the whole ecosystem basically ran on the kind of downstream effects of having megafauna on them. And then as soon as these guys go extinct, we have the kind of loss of the mammoth steppe grassland, and it turns into the sort of temperate taiga that we have today. So if we were to bring mammoths and other megafauna back to this region, hopefully, fingers crossed, it would change the very kind of nature of the land itself and turn it back into a productive kind of grassland, which supports a lot more biomass than temperate taiga. And this is the kind of the approach that Pleistocene Park, which is another kind of rewilding area, that's been taking. So it's in Chersky, I think, in far northern Siberia, run by Sergei Zimov. And so they've taken species like camels, bison, muskox to this region of Siberia, horses, where they've not been found for 10,000 years. and let them loose to see what happens. And they saw that exactly what was predicted did happen. That these animals manured the land. They kind of broke it up and allowed a different community of flora to flourish, a much more productive kind of grassland type ecosystem where there'd only been tundra taiga before.
Yeah, I think places like Siberia are the best kind of test run because the population is so sparse. But I was just wondering, in terms of reintroduction, not just of extinct megafauna, but also of megafauna we still have today, in high population areas like Western Europe and the UK, is there actually enough space for them to be reintroduced effectively?
I would say yes. I mean, certainly, if we go back to your previous point, I mean, Siberia and large parts of Alaska and northern Eurasia, they're sparsely populated, but they're not empty. I mean, people live there. And certainly, you'd have to be a braver person than me to say, oh, by the way, we're going to be releasing some 4-ton mammoths in your vicinity. Just leave them alone and don't do anything. But in the UK, parts of the UK are very densely populated and parts aren't. So, I mean, in the Highlands where I live, where I'm from, certainly north and west of Inverness, it's equivalent to Siberia in terms of population density. And I don't think. I mean, the problem is that it's not empty. There are large hunting estates. There's farmers. People that tend to be generally very antagonistic towards wildlife, strictly wildlife that might impact on their way of earning a living. So, I mean, people have looked at, for instance, the habitat that Eurasian lynx like, and whether we have enough of it in the UK to support a reintroduced population. And there are definitely parts, the Highlands, parts of Northumberland, which would quite happily accept a viable population of lynx. But this kind of research just is about the habitat and it's not about the human factors. So these are always the kind of key things to think about, the human factors. It's all very well saying lynx would be happy to live here, but would the farmers that also live there be happy to live with the lynx?
Yeah.
That's really almost a more important question than whether there's enough wood cover and prey for them.
Yeah. You mentioned, so you said lynx, other megafaunas or animals that could be reintroduced, maybe wolves, bears, bison. So how viable do you think it is to reintroduce animals like that, and what other animals could we potentially reintroduce into the UK?
Yeah, I mean, we have a whole suite of potentials because quite a lot has been lost from the UK. So red deer, moose, bison, aurochs, wild horse, Irish elk, wolves, bears, lynx. And in terms of what would be best to go for next, we've had success with beavers as our kind of first mammal reintroduction. I don't really think we need any more herbivores at the minute. Beavers are special because they're kind of ecosystem engineers. They kind of have a net positive effect on biodiversity where they're found. I think, despite the kind of recent stories, I think moose are quite a hard sell because they are dangerous. They're not like we always think of herbivores as they eat plants. They're not an issue, but the herbivores are the ones that are going to trample you, gore you, knock you down, collide with your car, really make you have a bad day. And certainly in places where moose are found, I'm thinking about like Sweden, then number of fatalities from collisions with moose are really high.
Really?
And that's really something that possibly because we've lived without them for so long, we don't fully appreciate at the moment. My preferred species for reintroduction would be the lynx, because we don't have any large carnivores in the UK anymore. Our largest carnivores, badger or fox, which are essentially scavengers. The lynx only went extinct in the UK around about the Middle Ages, almost certainly due to habitat modification by by humans. And it is entirely inoffensive. Unlike moose, unlike reindeer, nobody's ever been killed by a lynx. They couldn't do it. They're not strong enough and angry enough. They're very secretive, shy creatures. And they eat deer, which is the one thing we've got far too much of in this country. Instead of paying people to go out and cull deer, we could just release a few lynx and let them do it naturally. That would be my preferred next subject for reintroduction. And it's been done. So we have lots of good data for how to do a successful lynx reintroduction. They've been introduced to parts of Switzerland, parts of the Balkans as well. And it doesn't take a huge number of individuals to do it successfully. The real question, and the one that I think has been on a lot of people's minds since the discovery of those lynx outside Kingusi earlier this year, is the idea of getting the local populations on side. So if we were to reintroduce lynx to parts of the Highland, parts of Northumberland, we'd have to be certain that the local people were on side, that they supported it. And in particular, we'd have to have kind of schemes in place to protect the lynx and also to protect the livelihoods of the people that already lived there. So we know that lynx do take the occasional domestic animal like sheep or goats and things like that. But there are kind of well understood schemes where we can minimize that, and where their compensation can be paid to people who are affected by that one. So parts of Scandinavia have a lot of similar kind of farming systems to the UK, and they live quite happily with lynx and bear and wolf for the most part, because the people accept that they're part of the natural environment, and there are kind of schemes in place to make sure that people are compensated if it affects how they live their lives.
Yeah. And has there been illegal or sneaky introductions of the lynx in the UK, or is there literally just no evidence of them roaming our land at the moment?
No, well, I mean, there has in the news like about 4 or 5 months ago. There's all over the place about how they found not just one but 4 lynx just being dumped at Kingusi, which is only about an hour's drive from where I am just now in Inverness. And there's still a lot of questions to be answered about what was going on there. I did get a lot of messages from friends asking what I knew about it, being guilty by association, being interested in reintroduction and living quite close to where it happened. But hands up, it was nothing to do with me. I don't have any answers. But lynx aren't the kind of thing that you could just pick up in the corner shop. Where did they come from? Hopefully, they're at the Kincraig Wildlife Park now, where they're hopefully going to stay for the rest of their lives. But I think there's questions to be asked of where did they come from? How did they get into the UK? That takes serious money, I would say. It's not something you can do on a whim. And I think it'd be good to know, where the buck stops. Where did the money come from? Where was the organizing? And it's a shame that it was done that way, because I think it's kind of reintroduced the question, but in a bad way. It made people kind of suspicious and wary of things, just because of the kind of publicity that it received and the unethical way it was done.
Yeah, well, it must have been strategic, and it makes you think, surely it came from a zoo or an organization like that, or a charity maybe. It's really, really, really interesting.
I mean, there are so many questions. I mean, the animals themselves seem to be quite habituated to humans, which is a bad sign from the start. That's the one thing you don't want your reintroduced animals to have, is a lack of fear to humans. There are places you could quite easily pick up a lynx, but they're all quite far away. I hope they're doing some kind of genetic test or ancestral test to figure out where these animals have been prior to turning up in Kingusi. That could help to kind of narrow the scope a little bit. My best guess, if I had to put money on where these animals came from, I would say somewhere in Russia.
Really?
Probably pick one up for very little money. Yeah, people keep them as pets occasionally out there.
True.
So it wouldn't be that hard to find one. The difficult part is getting it from wherever it was in Eurasia to the UK undetected. It's not the kind of thing you can just take on your EasyJet as a support animal.
Hand luggage.
So
Yeah.
I think that must have been quite expensive however that was done.
Yeah. And what about wolves and bears? Have there been any secret reintroductions of those in the UK before?
Not that I know of. I mean, certainly there's as long as I've been alive, there's been discussions of reintroducing wolves. I mean, they only went extinct a few hundred years ago. But unlike lynx, wolves are dangerous to humans. There's no doubt about that. People that live beside wolves occasionally get attacked, occasionally get killed by them. And so they're a much harder sell than the lynx, which are inoffensive to humans. So, I mean, there are places where you can see wolves in the UK. So there are, I don't know if it's actually happened yet, but I have heard that some estates are trying to bring in fenced enclosures of wolves to see how that goes. Anders Bolson, I think, is in particular. But yeah, aside from it, a kind of fenced off, essentially just a big park, I don't see it being acceptable to the people that live in the UK. The risk, I think, we're just not comfortable enough with nature to accept the risks that maybe people who do live alongside wild animals quite happy to.
Yeah, but how dangerous are they? Because I've heard other people say that, you know, they're scared of humans and they won't be a threat, and if they take some sheep, you can subsidize that. So are they genuinely statistically a threat to humans living near them?
I mean, it depends. So certainly in North American wolves, there's pretty much over the past century, no one's been even attacked by a wolf in North America. But other parts where wolves are found, so South Asia, parts of East Asia as well, that they are more dangerous. So the Middle East as well, Iran, wolves there do have killed children. But then at the same time, we have to remember that, you know, we have dogs in this country, and dogs kill an awful lot of people just by, you know, being the numbers that they are and being around people all the time. So I think humans as a whole are very bad at judging risk and deciding what is an acceptable risk. I mean, you could walk out of your house tomorrow and get flattened by a tree, and that happens to people all the time, but nobody ever thinks it's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
The same with living with wild animals. You know, yes, you could get eaten by a wolf, but chances are you're much more likely to get killed by a cow, stampeding, or to, you know, fall off a ladder and kill yourself that way.
Yeah. Does it go against our almost evolutionary or basic instincts to reintroduce things like wolves and bears? Because it feels like we're programmed to want to get rid of them.
Yeah, I'm not sure about evolutionary reasons, but certainly cultural reasons. I mean, we if you think of our kind of history with the wolf, nobody ever really has anything good to say about them.
Yeah.
They are the bad guys in all of our stories, you know, from the Bible to Brothers Grimm. The wolf is the one thing that you don't want around, the one thing you don't want to be like. So yeah, even apart from the fact that occasionally we're on their menu, certainly they are the bad guy. The bear is a slightly more complex story, but the bear sometimes is the good guy, sometimes it's the bad guy. But yeah, certainly, again, very dangerous. There is a definite inherent risk of being around bears. And so yeah, it does make it a hard sell. And the problem with the UK compared to parts of Europe is that because we're an island, any reintroductions have to be human mediated. It's not like the examples of wolf recovery in the Netherlands, where they can just walk from their nearest population into the Netherlands, or lynx expanding into parts of Slovakia or Slovenia, where they can just walk. If we're going to be serious about reintroduction in the UK, then we have to bring them in. Like, we have to physically kind of transport them onto our little island.
Yeah, and they're here to stay because
Yeah.
they can't swim. So what would be the benefits potentially of a lynx reintroduction? You said about managing deer populations, but I was just wondering if there are any others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a huge benefit. And then also, if you look at the examples of things like beavers and red kites and white-tailed eagles, ecotourism would be another natural benefit. People spend lots of money, lots of time going to see white-tailed eagles in Mull. People spend lots of money. I've spent money myself going to see reintroduced beavers in the UK, trying to spot them. So yeah, certainly, I think there would be a big sell for ecotourists wanting to go and see them. I know that in Andalusia in southern Spain, the Doñana Park, which is one of the strongholds of the Iberian lynx, they make a lot of money from kind of tourists going to just observe the lynx, going out with trained guides to try and spot them. In fact, my dad and my sister went to try and find Iberian lynx earlier this year. They didn't see any, but they still had a great time. So even if there's a no-show, you're still employing somebody, contributing money to the local economy, encouraging respect for the animal, encouraging people to be trained as rangers or wildlife guides. So there's a huge number of, I think, positive knock-on effects from just having these majestic animals around.
Yeah, I mean, as a wildlife photographer, having animals like that in the UK, I'd be spending so much money traveling to Scotland or buying a house in Scotland to try and photograph them. I mean, yeah, ecotourism definitely is an industry to keep an eye on. I assume it's growing by the year.
I would think so. I mean, certainly places like Mull and Skye, which are rural economies, traditionally have not attracted a lot of investment. Certainly, they're making the most of having white-tailed eagles around, and so their fishermen in the off season can take their boats out to show people them flying around their kind of nests, and so yeah, it provides another viable investment stream for local people.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could bring one animal back from extinction, what would it be?
Oh, that is a good question. I think it would be, I mean, yeah, different answers for different reasons. I'd love to see the sabre-toothed homotherium. I think that it's just such an awesome animal. That would be one of my answers. I'd also love to see a living thylacine. That would be great. Tasmanian tigers, that would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, I could go on forever. Like dodos, I'd love to see one of those. Yeah, I've got a whole kind of shopping list of what I'd like to see back.
What about from a pragmatic or practical viewpoint? What would be the best or most effective one, maybe in the UK, for example, or Western Europe, to reintroduce or bring back from extinction?
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know if I have a kind of clear answer for what would be the best de-extinction for Western Europe. It's probably could be an easier question in somewhere like Australia, where we have the thylacine as a recent extinction, and such a keystone species. The kind of largest marsupial predator of recent times. That would be a kind of no-brainer. It's the best one to bring back. For the UK or Western Europe, maybe something like the great auk. So the great auk, a kind of flightless seabird, last seen 1840s off Iceland. looked like a kind of giant razor bill.
Yeah.
But yeah, they went extinct purely through human persecution, pretty much. And I think they would not have any net negatives, so they don't interfere with humans. They are quite nice to look at. They were exterminated by humans, so we have possibly a moral obligation to think about their de-extinction. The problem, I think, with anything sort of big or large is we don't really know what we like to live with them anymore. So if we wanted to de-extinct a mammoth or a woolly rhino, these are large, dangerous, unpredictable, often grumpy animals. Even sort of smaller things like saber-toothed or cave lions or cave bears. Unintended consequences are always at the back of my mind.
Yeah. Did you say the great auk was a flightless seabird?
Yeah.
So how did
So
they move about?
So they were good swimmers. So they were the original penguin. So they're the penguin of the northern hemisphere, and that's what they were called. It's only when kind of later explorers discovered what we know as penguins in the southern hemisphere that they gave them the same name, because they're mostly black and white flightless swimming birds. What's the difference? But yeah, great auks, flightless, nested on islands. So I mean, they were found in the UK. They were found in St Kilda, found in the Orkney Islands, and probably even as far south as places like Cornwall and Devon.
Wow.
Back then.
I'm in Cornwall, so I would have loved them to still be around. Can you tell me
Yeah.
a bit more about the Thylacine, the marsupial predator in Australia?
Yeah, so the Pleistocene is also known as the Tasmanian tiger or Tasmanian wolf. So it's a large, very dog-like animal with stripes on its hindquarters. It went extinct in 1936, although people today still claim to see them. They were last found in Tasmania, the kind of island state up the south of mainland Australia. But before dingoes were introduced into Australia about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, they were found all over the continent of Australia. And again, it's a story of deliberate persecution by humans. So the Tasmanian government of the time were worried that these thylacines were eating sheep, and so they put a bounty on their heads, and people were paid to hunt, catch them, and kill them. And so they probably lingered until the 1950s at least.
Really?
Yeah, probably. There a couple of papers came out in the last few years looking at sort of last sightings and kind of statistical analysis of sightings to see when the last few remaining individuals would have been around. And so yeah, they didn't eat that many sheep. That was a kind of scurrilous lie put around by the government. People occasionally kept them as pets in Tasmania. People that didn't die that long ago had them as pets when they were young.
Wow.
And again, no danger to humans, minimal danger to livestock, but an important part of the marsupial ecosystem. I mean, these were the animals that ate kangaroos. I mean, today the largest carnivore, marsupial carnivore, is the Tasmanian devil, which again, like our badger, is a scavenger.
Yeah.
All the kind of large marsupial carnivores are gone. Pleistocene was the last one to hang on.
Yeah. And how big were they? And when you say marsupial, is that relating to Oceania, Australia area?
Yeah, so I mean, marsupials, there are a few found in the Americas, like possums, things like that, but mostly they're an Australasian phenomenon. Pleistocene was a marsupial, so it had a pouch. It gave birth to very small young that lived in the pouch for a long period of time. And yeah, originally the Pleistocene was found from New Guinea, which is, on the other side of Wallace's Line, which is where marsupials are kind of confined to. And yeah, very successful predator until people turned up.
Yeah. And how come they weren't a threat to humans?
I don't know really. There are reports of people being bitten by them, but they're sort of dog size, and so yeah, I think you'd be able to fight one off fairly easily. One of the last guys to photograph, if I was seeing a guy called David Lee, who took pictures of the last one in the zoo in Hobart. After he finished taking his pictures, it bit him on the backside. So yeah, they were capable of biting, but not capable of killing, unless you were very unlucky, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no records that I know of Pliocenes killing anyone.
Yeah. And speaking of the Oceania area, what are the reasons to why there's so many quote unquote weird animals? Is it because of geographic isolation? Is it because of climate?
Yeah, it's also, weird is a very subjective term.
Yeah.
Weird to us as maybe Western Europeans, but if you're to ask, somebody from the Torres Islands to look at a bison or to look at a sheep, they'd probably say those things are equally weird.
True. True.
So yeah, I think this is something that the fauna of Oceania has suffered from. That because Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, all these places have suffered under empire and colonial attitudes. The idea that the platypus is weird, but
Yeah.
a sheep isn't, that's really not been to their favor. I think they're credible. If you look at the marsupials, you look at a wombat, you look at a koala, you look at a kangaroo. These are incredible creatures, and I think, calling them weird is a disservice. They're not weird.
Yeah.
They're cool.
Yeah. No. When I meant weird, I meant just like
You're just being devil's
peculiar.
advocate. No, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. Speaking of the duck-billed platypus, were there any kind of descendants of that are now extinct, like maybe like a giant platypus or something like that?
Platypus, yeah, there are fossil platypus known, including ones that are bigger than the modern day. I can't remember what the name of them is. I think I do remember that. So platypus that are around today, they don't have teeth. So in their bill, they're toothless. They don't need them. But some of the earlier fossils of ancestors of the platypus do have teeth, which is pretty interesting. So they're part of they're not marsupials. They're part of the monotreme group with the echidnas. So they're even cooler. I'm not going to say weird. They're even cooler than marsupials in that they don't give birth to small young. They give birth to they lay eggs. And kind of look after those, feed them a sort of milk that they produce as well.
Yeah. I think you just mentioned one, but what other animals are closely related to the platypus that are alive today? What are the closest
there's a few different species of echidna, which is also known as spiny anteater.
Oh yeah.
It looks a bit like a kind of hedgehog, porcupine kind of creature, and again, very inoffensive, very placid and insectivore. There's a couple of species found in Australia and a couple of species found in Papua New Guinea as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's it. There's not a lot of monotremes left, so that makes them even more special.
Yeah. And are they threatened? Are they very endangered platypus?
Yeah, certainly some of the species of echidna are. And I think the platypus is classed as endangered as well by the IUCN. And there are kind of laws in Australia around disturbing them and need protection.
Yeah. That brings me to the next question, which is, what do you think about our conservation approaches? Do you think humans should be hands-on with conservation, or would it be more effective to create space for nature to do its own thing, or is it just really dependent on the animal trying to protect all the ecosystem?
I think there's room for both approaches. Certainly, it seems to me that nature doesn't really need help. It just needs to be left alone for the most part. And that if you just back off a little bit, it'll sort itself out without any help. But certainly there are cases where intervention is absolutely necessary. So, for example, if you look at some really good conservation studies from New Zealand, which has suffered a lot since contact by things like the takahe or the kakapo, where their numbers were reduced to a handful, And then through really intense conservation methods, they've been able to bring them back to strong, viable numbers and release them into areas where they were previously but hadn't been seen for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's room for both approaches, I think, and very much on a case by case basis.
Yeah. And for the UK, I know we've mentioned kind of rewilding, reintroductions. What do you think are some other kind of maybe broader, maybe more kind of widespread effective methods we can potentially do to increase our biodiversity?
Well, certainly, like in the Highlands, I know that deer fencing has had, I think, a net positive effect on biodiversity, just because the huge numbers of deer that we have up here and the kind of devastation that they cause to saplings. So if they can be kept out of an area, then that allows trees to grow past a threshold where they're not edible to deer anymore, and that helps with certainly with biodiversity up here. But yeah, going back to what I was saying earlier about us being an island, that makes it tricky, and so I think there is some space for a kind of just leave things alone kind of argument, but because we're dependent on if we want to get anything back, we have to get it from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's not going to get there by itself. We have to intervene at some stage, as we did with the beaver, as we did with the red kite and the seagull.
Yeah. And how optimistic should we be about the future of our biodiversity and the future of conservation, not just in the UK, but globally?
I think it's a great question. Certainly, I think I feel personally a bit more optimistic now, having seen, even just in the past sort of 40, 50 years, so a bit more than my own lifetime, having seen successful reintroductions happen by fantastically dedicated, committed individuals, thinking of people like Derek Gow and Roy Dennis, who've been instrumental in some of the successful reintroductions we've had. The work they've done has been amazing, and it's been driven by these enthusiastic, dynamic personalities. And they show that it can be done if you want it enough. And so, having the beaver back, having the red kites. I've seen red kites every time I go over the bridge to the Black Isle. You sort of see them hovering around the road because they're back and they've spread so successfully. These are great success stories, and I think that it can only move forward from there. We have these examples which can lead us to a more biodiverse future, and we have the kind of expertise and the people still around to help.
Yeah, and speaking of red kites, and being positive and optimistic, I mean, as a kid flicking through bird books, a lot of my childhood, I would see red kites and it would be a speck in Wales where their population distribution was.
Yeah.
And then going kind of towards Cornwall from where I'm originally from in Kent, in just South England, just seeing them soaring over the motorways and just being in absolute disbelief that they're here. And then even buzzards, like when I'd go to France on road trips, me and my dad would always be excited when we see a buzzard, because in Kent there just wasn't as many. I don't know if that was because of maybe DDT and persecution, but fast forward a decade and they're everywhere in my local area. So I think being optimistic and realizing that we can reintroduce these species or help them come back from the brink is just so positive and makes you kind of want to do more of it.
Absolutely. And I think, attitudes have definitely changed over the past century. If you think back to the beginning of the 20th century, when, a lot of these species were essentially going extinct. So, the last seagulls are around about the 1901 or so. The idea of bringing that back then would have just been totally anathema. They just wouldn't have countenanced it. But now I think we have, even if we're not very biodiverse, we have quite a conservation literate population, thanks to Sir David and maybe BBC Bristol. But there's a lot more goodwill towards the environment, and also an understanding of how important biodiversity is.
Yeah. And I was just my mind randomly just thought of owls. And I have a place near me in Kent, a kind of conservation park that do rewilding projects, such as the bison project called Wildwood. And I don't know if I remember it correctly, but I remember seeing, I think it was either an eagle owl or, yeah, Eurasian eagle owl, like one of the really, really big ones. And it said they used to be in the UK. I was just wondering if that was true, because I don't know if my memory's correct.
I think so. I think that eagle owl there's fossil evidence for them being around, and certainly maybe one of the knock-on effects of having large herbivores like bison around and the amount of dung they're producing, that's going to be attracting insects, it's going to be attracting small mammals, going to be attracting owls as well. So, maybe it's an example of these kind of positive knock-on effects from having reintroduced large megafauna to these islands.
Yeah, and what would the eagle owls hunt on?
Good question. You'd have to ask my dad, who knows way more about birds than I do. I imagine they'd be small mammals of some sort, like moles and shrews, something like that.
Yeah, and I just wonder why they haven't been reintroduced already across the UK if they were ones.
Could they possibly already be here?
I'm not sure, because I saw it it was caged. It wasn't an actual wild one, so it just makes me wonder why they're not here already.
Yeah, I know that some species of owl aren't the best flyer. Maybe they've struggled to get over the channel, but just frantically Googling to see if I can find any information. Yeah, I'm just checking out the BTO. They say that there's sporadic breeding of eagle owls in England.
Oh, wow. Really? I thought there'd be quite a few in Scotland, just in the forests.
Mm.
But
yeah, that might be worth looking more into. Certainly, there's other kind of large birds that have occasionally kind of wandered back, and been helped back as well. So things like cranes and storks, we're sort of starting to see make the UK a stop-off point and even stay over winter. That's great.
yeah, and just thinking of kind of the eagle owl, red kite, cranes and the storks, and bears and wolves, we seem to have a bias towards these large animals, and especially large predators. What do you think the reason behind that is? Why do we romanticize these large animals?
Probably because they're in our stories. They're we learn about them as soon as we can. Read books, Goldilocks and the Three Bears or Winnie the Pooh. I mean, these are our kind of cultural mores, essentially, which is is a good and a bad thing. Certainly, it gives us a bit of familiarity with them. But like in the case of the wolf, I don't think it does the living animal itself any favors to almost be cast as the bad guy. And for example, with the lynx, I think it not being in our kind of cultural space at all might be to its benefit.
Yeah, why is that so? Why? Because to be honest, I didn't know lynx used to live in the UK until I grew up a bit, but I knew bears and wolves did. So why are lynx kind of overlooked throughout the UK history and culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's probably, extinction lynx is our best guess is somewhere around 8th or 9th century AD. So that's post-Roman invasion, that post having a semi-literate society. But they would have always been secretive. They would always have been hiding away in the woodland. Not many people would have seen them. Unlike with the bears and wolves, where even if bears went extinct before lynx, which is probable, maybe an Iron Age extinction for brown bears, people would always have had them around. The Romans brought them over for their games. We've always had dancing bears as part of our kind of entertainment, bear baiting, zoos or traveling menageries have almost had bears as well. And they haven't sort of slipped out of cultural memory in the same way that maybe the and the same with wolves. I mean, wolves have as long as we've had dogs around, we've had a kind of wolf next door, essentially.
Yeah.
That's kept
And
them in our consciousness.
I remember you mentioning that the wolves and lynx were exterminated by humans in the UK or extinct around the medieval times. And before then, we managed to coexist with both of these predators. So I'm just wondering what changed during the medieval time for them to suddenly be persecuted.
So certainly with for the lynx, so like 8th, 9th century, around about that time, we have changes in land use. So a lot of kind of root felling and expansion of farmland to meet the population. So that has a double effect of reducing habitat for the lynx and also bringing them into contact with people more, which is always dangerous. For the wolves, it's a slightly later extinction, so maybe even 16th, 17th, 18th century. It's hard to say. There's not really any solid evidence, but there it's probably to do with, again, changes in land use. So we have increasing kind of agglomeration of farms into much larger entities. We have movement of people from the countryside to the urban centers. All these things that kind of encourage persecution because you don't want wolves eating your sheep or actually your cows.
Yeah. And for the lynx, what is your prediction for them to be legally reintroduced back into the UK, if you could, if you have one?
I, I, I won't make a prediction, but I would like. I think it is of all the potential reproduced animals. I think it's the one most likely to happen. It just needs a bit of kind of political will and a bit of public buy-in. If we can kind of get people to be excited and interested in the idea of lynx reintroduction, then that'll go, I think, a long way to making it reality. There are many groups and organizations at the minute looking into the feasibility of it, some more successfully than others. But the information is kind of trickling out there. And so I'm hopeful that within, maybe the next 10 or so years, we'll at least see a kind of pilot project to look at the feasibility of it, something similar to the beaver trial in the synth that went on over the past 2 decades. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful, but I don't want to get stuck into making a prediction
Yeah, fair enough.
that'll jinx things.
Yeah. Don't want to jinx a lynx.
No.
I was just wondering, if there's any other examples of the Eurasian lynx being reintroduced or just like coming back from the brink in maybe some nearby neighbors, such as you mentioned Iberian lynx, but specifically the Eurasian.
Yeah, so they've had quite a successful reintroduction in Switzerland. So that they went extinct there a few centuries ago and have been reintroduced in the past 50 or so years to produce a sort of stable, viable population. They've tried, I think they tried reintroducing them into parts of southern Germany. I can't remember exactly how successful that's been. But again, also there is kind of natural expansion of some of their range. So it's very fragmented across most of Western Europe. So France, Germany, Switzerland, these aren't joined up populations. It's a sort of different story. I think the kind of Russian population is quite large and connected. The Scandinavian population is quite large as well, although it can be legally hunted there at certain times.
Yeah. And how big are their territories? Estimate.
I don't 100% know, actually. I mean, they are solitary, so they keep themselves apart from during breeding season. Okay, so it's telling me here, so about lynx density is about 1 per 100 kilometers square in
Wow.
Switzerland, up to 4 per 100 kilometers square in Russia. So
Wow.
yeah,
I thought it'd be more dense in Switzerland than in Russia. Or is that just because population
I think
size?
I think it very much depends on prey density as well. So
Yeah.
where there's more prey, they'll support more lynx.
Yeah. 1 per 100 kilometers squared is. How would that relate to the size of say Scotland, if there's 1 to 4 per 100
Yeah,
kilometers
you
square.
probably get, you're talking about total numbers of
Yeah.
under 30, probably.
Wow.
But that's probably going to be enough. I mean, we know from looking at the Iberian lynx, inbreeding's not really a problem. That their genetic diversity is essentially zero, but they're quite happy. I don't know if anyone's looked at that in Eurasian lynx, but I don't anticipate it being a massive issue for them.
Is that population also due to the fact that would they be classed as like the apex predator? They'd be kind of at the top of the food chain, so there wouldn't be a big enough.
Iberian lynx?
Eurasian. So say they
Eurasian. Yeah, they would be in this country because there's to be nothing bigger than them until wolf or bear come back. I'm sure wolf and bear would occasionally kill lynx if they come across it. As would leopard, where they overlap with range as well.
Yeah, and say there's just roughly 30 ended up being in Scotland, for example. Would that be enough to deal with the population of deer in Scotland?
Probably not enough to deal with it completely, but if each individual is taking one deer a week or so, I mean, that look these numbers out there.
Yeah.
But it would definitely make a dent, and I think more importantly than just the numbers they're taking, the effect it might have on deer behavior as well, to have an actual carnivore around. From studies in Yellowstone where they reintroduced wolves, the effect they had on the behavior of herbivores there were significant and caused them to stop, to be more skittish and jittery. So they never stayed too long in one place, and that's a real problem in Scotland, because when they stay too long in one place, they just eat everything. If they can kind of be forced to move along more often, then that might give things a chance to grow back.
Yeah, and how much more effective would a lynx be who's kind of evolved to hunt a deer, that can smell a deer or hear a deer and track it, compared to a human just using their eyes with a gun? And the lynx would be doing it basically day and night, and humans sometimes do it as a sport, so it'd just be much more effective.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing more effective than natural predation. You can never really replace that.
Yeah, and also the fact that, like you said, it maybe would kill not that many per week, but the knock-on effect of just a deer seeing a lynx and learning, oh, I need to run away from that, because if they're doing it every single day and most hours of the day, even if they don't hunt all the deer, the deer are gonna learn to fly, like run away much more often to the even maybe a sound of a tree snapping or a human. So it's definitely going to have a positive knock-on effect. Do you think?
For sure. These animals scent mark as well to kind of cover the territory, and that'll leave sort of signals everywhere for the deer to be aware of.
Yeah. Just to end, I've got a few quick questions for you, if that's all right. The first one is, if you had one piece of advice for your 20-year-old self, what would it be?
Probably what industry? Maybe if I had my time over, I probably wouldn't do a PhD in ancient DNA. Maybe just go straight to work, and then I would end up where I am today, just not working. But that's maybe what I would do.
How come? Like, what did the PhD? What's the negative of doing the PhD at that
I think so. Very much. I mean, everyone's experience is different, but for me, it very much felt like it was a kind of factory line where the only kind of possible outcome was you'd have to end up in academia. There was no real discussion of alternative skills or how you could apply what you were learning to fields outside of academia. And so it's been personally, it's been quite a struggle to kind of uh, find work that feels useful and relevant if you're kind of abandoning academia. Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's experienced it.
Yeah. And you said about kind of going into work quicker. What other jobs would have maybe opened, like that would have opened doors for if you did that?
Well, I mean, my kind of original background's in biochemistry, so well, not really a kind of fluffy zoology conservation angle at all. So I did, right about when I was 20, I did an interview for a position at Pfizer down in Kent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't happen. It'd be interesting to see how my life would have turned out if it had.
Yeah. I mean, speaking from nearby, like a lot of people I know worked for Pfizer because I'm only down the road for it in Canterbury originally, where I'm from, and I think the factories are still being used, but there's been loads of redundancies
Yeah, heard that
every
as
few
well.
years, so you never know where the
Yeah.
path will take you. But this is kind of similar to what you've already said, maybe about the PhD. But the second question is, what are some bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
Well, it's hard to kind of recognize what's bad, but you can recognize what's good. So certainly things that I would definitely pass on for anyone that's thinking of doing a PhD is to investigate where you're going to be doing it. So that there is often a kind of pressure to do a PhD in a lab, which produces a lot of work, publishes a lot of papers. Um, but I think more important than that is to get a feel for what your supervisor is going to be like, whether they're going to be supportive of you rather than just using you as a kind of means to further their own research ambitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think publishing is not the be all and end all of science or a PhD. There are other very important factors that you have to weigh up as well.
Yeah. It's great to see about 3 stacks of shelves of books behind you. So the next question's quite fitting. What few books have had the most impact on your life, career, and way of thinking, if you can name some?
Yeah, so in terms of helping me to choose what I chose to study, who I- so this is a big influence. Don't know if you've seen
Nice.
that one.
Extinct Birds. Yeah.
Extinct Birds by L. Fuller, which I got when I was around about 21, which is a really incredible, fascinating book, lavishly illustrated. So it's a history of extinctions amongst birds since around 1500. So it's got everything from the dodo to the passenger pigeon, to the grey gull. And coming from, well, I was doing a biology degree at the time in biochemistry, but I really didn't have an appreciation before reading this book about how much extinction was an ongoing process. So there is definitely a tendency, I think, for people to think that extinction is something in the past. So dinosaurs, it's mammoths. It's not happening now, but that's really not the case. That there is no species so abundant that it can't go extinct in the course of a few decades. As we've seen, the passenger pigeon went the most abundant bird on the planet with a population in the billions to a single individual left in 1914. So I think that just reading Extinct Birds helped to give a genuinely sort of life-changing perspective on the idea of extinction and how precarious every species is, really. And I include our own species in that as well.
Yeah.
There's nothing special about humans that will stop them from going extinct. It's it's the fate of every species sooner or later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a reason why some humans are trying so hard to, colonize Mars as a safety buffer almost, which is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, at the same time as destroying the one habitable planet.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely will add that to my reading list.
Yeah,
Sounds
I'd
fascinating.
recommend it.
Passenger pigeons. I've heard of passenger pigeons. I had no idea that a billion of them were
Oh,
once around.
billions. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
they were, in the 19th century, there was more passenger pigeons than people.
Wow.
Uh, Only took a few decades of persecution for them to turn extinct.
What? So was it just persecution that made them extinct? What was the reason behind that?
So there was a lot of direct persecution. They were easy to catch. They flocked in huge numbers, and they traveled as enormous groups of millions and millions of birds, and then people would just they were easy to catch. You could just chuck a stick up into a tree and brain a dozen of them. They'd all just fall down. So there was that, and I think Errol Fuller's actually also written a book just about the passenger pigeon, which is worth reading as well. Also, the kind of expansion of the railways in North America. So this is a North American species, but that expansion of the railway allowed people to hunt passenger pigeons in the south and have them freighted up to the north to the markets, which had a big negative effect as well. And they were also, you can imagine, if several million birds land in your fields, there's not very much of your crop left by the time they've left. So again, they were poisoned and fed to hogs as a protein source because farmers didn't want them eating their crops.
Yeah, and why were they so abundant? Because there would obviously be predators surely around hunting them. So
yeah, so they were just a sort of safety in numbers. That was their survival technique. So and part of the reason for their downfall. So there was a critical threshold over which, if there weren't enough passenger pigeons, then that affected their ability to find a mate. That affected their ability to breed, and death by 1,000 cuts just led to their population collapsing, and then it becomes an extinction vortex. So you have not enough passenger pigeons to replenish their population levels, and then that just sort of accelerates as fewer and fewer next generations of passenger pigeons are being made.
yeah, and well, the pigeons that were used as messengers was that a separate species? Is that the one?
Yeah, no, that's just rocked up. So the kind of feral pigeons that you see all over the place today. So that's what messenger pigeons were. But the phrase "still pigeon" comes from passenger pigeon. So a still pigeon, somebody who's a kind of patsy. That one of the ways that they would hunt passenger pigeons is catch one, tie it to a stool, and then let it call out, and all its friends would come, and they would just catch the whole lot.
Yeah, and it's just
It's
fascinating.
extinct, but it survives in language, which is sad.
Yeah, yeah. It's just fascinating how some animals are so easy to catch. Were they not afraid of humans?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been lucky enough to spend some time in the Galapagos Islands, which is one of the last kind of naive ecosystems left. And the animals there aren't afraid of people. You have birds landing on your head. Giant tortoises will come right up to you. You can swim beside the penguins. And we kind of have to assume that this was the kind of natural way of things. Humans don't particularly look like predators. We're not, that scary. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have sharp claws. And you have to imagine that when people first moved into areas where people hadn't been before, like Australia, North America, Northern Eurasia, the animals would not have had a kind of predator response to us. They would have treated us like any other animal around the waterhole. And it's only later they learned, perhaps too late, what a threat humans can be.
Yeah, and is that kind of us because we maybe persecuted them or hunted them or just kind of expanded too much of them to exist? Is the ones that survive, the animals that have survived now, they almost been, I don't want to say selected, but they tend to be the most skittish ones that actually end up surviving? And is that why so many animals today, like foxes and badgers, won't come near us?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly mammals as a whole are quite intelligent in the grand scheme of things, and they have kind of behavioral plasticity that allows them to recognize threats, and have that information transmitted not just through their genes, but by their own kind of social nature. So adult animals teaching their young to avoid humans. Yeah, and certainly there will have been some selection as well, in the same sense that, you know, the opposite has happened during domestication. So we've selected for animals that are happy to interact with humans, and over generations selected the most friendly wolves to become dogs, or the most friendly wild cats to become domestic cats. For sure, the same thing has happened in the opposite direction with the wild populations, that if you were too friendly with humans, then you're more likely to end up in a pie.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
It's the best way to describe it. This is just a random thought. I did mention Mars, and if humans in a, you know, however many decades time, or centuries time, could terraform Mars and colonize it, what animals do you think would be brought over or needed to be brought over to create a kind of natural ecosystem on terraform Mars? What would be the first few to bring over, other than maybe like cows and stuff?
I don't know. I mean, I can't see it happening. I mean, we also, I think it'd be very bad to terraform Mars without having a good understanding of, you know, what was there before. I mean, we don't really know for sure whether there was ever any life on Mars. That's about, we'd have to search for fossils. You know, we know it had water.
Yeah.
One of the prerequisites for life. We don't even know if there's areas, you know, on the surface or even under the ground where Martian equivalent of bacteria and archaea might still hang on. And if we go about terraforming, then those guys are gonna lose out. But yeah, putting that to one side, just as a hypothetical, what would be a good animal to bring to Mars? It would probably be, if we look at kind of analogs from the past. So if I'm thinking about Polynesian sailors. So when they sailed to new islands, they took a whole kind of package of things with them in their boats, which included dogs, rats, chickens. Chickens would probably be a good one to take. Dogs would be good. Dogs provide companionship, but they also provide warmth, and they also, in extreme circumstances, provide food as well. So yeah, I'm sure people, if they end up going to Mars, will take their dogs with them.
Yeah, and why did the Polynesians bring rats with them? That's obviously caused loads of implications for New Zealand, for example, nowadays. But what was the reason for rats?
No, you can eat them. So the kind of Polynesian rat, the Kiori, it's edible. All rats are edible if you're hungry enough. But and also they don't need looking after, so you could just release them. You know, I'm fairly sure they were brought deliberately, but they also may have just been stowaways on the craft that people were taking. But yeah, you just sort of let them loose, and they can go breed themselves, find their own food, and then you can catch them and eat them, and you know they're safe.
Yeah, and cause havoc on the native wildlife a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Speaking of kind of Polynesian explorers and stuff, I've learnt about Christopher Columbus kind of colonizing the Americas, even though natives are already there. Do you know more about kind of the order in which humans colonized which area first? Because I've no kind of knowledge other than kind of Western colonization. I know we originated from Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, but who were the first groups of people to expand across the globe?
So if we're talking about Homo sapiens, like our species, other species of Homo have left Africa. So the ancestors of the Neanderthals made it to Europe. Homo erectus made it as far as Indonesia. But Homo sapiens, our species, we kind of first left Africa about 60, 70,000 years ago, made it to Europe by about 40,000 years ago, got to Australia by about 50,000 years ago, got to North America, so got to kind of Alaska region about 30,000 years ago, more or less. But most of Canada was covered with ice sheets at that time period. They got to southern North America about 15,000 years ago and expanded pretty immediately down as far as the tip of South America. So that's all the continents covered pretty much. And then you have kind of later expansions. So you have Madagascar, probably about 1st century BC, New Zealand, 13th century AD. That's pretty much it. Then that's all the kind of large real estate on the planet kind of accounted for by that point.
Yeah.
And it is interesting that one of the arguments for a human role in extinction is that quite often the extinction chronology matches very closely to when humans first turn up.
Yeah, I saw that on a random Wikipedia rabbit hole one time. Just like, I don't know if it's, I guess can it be seen as only a correlation? It can't be determined as a causation at this point.
Yeah. So certainly, if we look at an example of the Americas and a couple of species, so for instance, like the ground sloths, which are an American species found in North and South America, but also in the Caribbean. So humans arrive in the Americas, overlap with ground sloths. Ground sloths go extinct in mainland North Americas around about 11,000, 12,000 BC. But in the Caribbean, which has its own kind of range of ground sloths, they hang on for another 6,000 or 7,000 years, and they only go extinct 4,000 or 5,000 years ago when humans turn up. So I think in that case, it'd be hard to argue for a climatic cause when you have an extinction on a mainland, which is only 50, 60 kilometers from the mainland Caribbean. And then you have a 6,000 year difference in extinction.
Yeah. And what do you think about the climate arguments for extinction? Do you think that's too much of a broad term, or do you think it is?
I think it's part of it. Certainly, I think what's been kind of possibly underestimated is how much the loss of megafauna will impact changes in climate as well. So when things like mammoths, woolly rhinos, ground sloths, diprotodon, when these things go extinct, then you're losing the ecosystem services they're providing. We know that from the example of things like Pleistocene Park and the change of the mammoth steppe grassland to tundra, that if you don't have these large mammals, then that changes how the flora develop. That changes how the ground itself behaves, and so I think that certainly an overlooked part of the answer is that the climate changes because the animals go extinct rather than the animals go extinct because of climate change. Certainly there is climate changing at the time as well. We have this sort of swing from glacial conditions to interglacial conditions. But that's happened many times over the Pleistocene, and the species that we lose at the Pleistocene-Holocene transition have come through those with no problem. The only major difference, as far as I can see, is that humans are around this time, and that's why they don't make it.
Yeah. And this is, again, it's just a kind of opinionated question for you, but what percentage is it humans and what percentage is it kind of climate change or climate change caused by them being extinct in terms of a ratio?
I mean, in my personal opinion, I think it's going to be 80 or 90% human caused, 10% climate.
Yeah.
The climate is not going to help because that sort of change, that rapid change from glacial conditions is going to stress the populations. But they've come out of that stress before. I think it's just having humans around that with their hunting, with their habitat changing ways. That's just what's tipping them over the edge, and that doesn't take much.
Yeah, And speaking of kind of Neanderthals and other Homo species, were we able to interbreed with them successfully? Was that a
Yeah, for
practice
sure.
that happened?
So that's been one of the big findings from, I guess, the whole field of ancient DNA has been looking at Neanderthal genomes and that of early modern humans as well. So the first Neanderthal DNA was published in 1997, looking at the mitochondria, which is just the kind of maternal lineage of DNA. And that showed complete disjunction between Neanderthal and modern humans. So that suggested that there'd been a replacement event, that modern humans had come in and completely replaced Neanderthals. But later on, when the nuclear genome was published, which I think was in 2005, 2006, which is both the parental and both of the parents' kind of contribution, that was able to show that Neanderthals interbred with modern humans, and that in fact, for all non-African humans, so that's Western Europeans, that's East Asians, that's Aboriginals, that's Native Americans, every non-African human population has somewhere between 1% and 5% Neanderthal contribution.
Wow.
So the interbreeding happened somewhere in the Middle East, probably as humans kind of left Africa, and that left a legacy of the hybridization in our genes.
Yeah, and does that include kind of interbreeding with like Homo erectus and other ones like that?
So there are other species that we know interbred with our ancestors of Homo sapiens. So the Denisovans were kind of fairly unknown population that lived in Asia. We don't have any good skeletons of them, but we've got a few bones, we've got a jawbone and a few random bits and pieces. They're known almost entirely from their genome, which has been sequenced. And so for them, they've left a contribution of, again, around about 5 to 8% in populations of Austronesian humans. So people from Papua New Guinea, from the Torres Islands, from Australia.
Yeah.
So there are multiple hybridization events in our own lineage that have left signatures in our genes. And there are some signals as well that the same thing happened with Neanderthals and other extinct hominid species that they would have met as well. So it makes the picture more complex. It's kind of moved from a sort of complete replacement story to one of hybridization and replacement, which is, I think, more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I was just wondering as well, could they be seen as separate species if they were able to interbreed, or would they be classed as subspecies?
I mean, it depends who you ask. So one of the problems with biology is that it doesn't like to confirm to any boxes you try and put it in. So certainly according to the biological species concept, which says that species are good if they cannot produce viable offspring together. But even that has its limits. So I don't know anyone that would argue that a lion and a tiger are the same species.
Yeah.
But they can produce viable offspring, viable fertile offspring, no problem.
Really? Wow.
So yeah, that's a problem. There's other species concepts that we can use. So the phagogenetic species concept, which looks at the sort of genetics of various populations and seeds, whether they form distinct branches when they're analyzed phylogenetically. According to that concept, then you could say that, yeah, humans and Neanderthals are good separate species. So yeah, it depends who you ask.
Yeah.
You get a different answer every time.
Yeah, that's the difficult thing with complex stuff like this, that obviously we can't, observe physically nowadays as well.
Yeah, there's no one answer fits all.
Yeah. Well, Ross Barnett, ladies and gentlemen. Ross, I absolutely love your work, and I hope the audience learned as much as I did today. We had some fascinating conversations.
My pleasure.
What projects are you currently working on, if any?
There's a very few things that are kind of left over from academic work. So there's some manuscripts I've been involved with slightly tangentially mostly looking at kind of populations of animals in Indonesia, using some museum specimens and also living populations as well. But yeah, there's not very much academically on the horizon at the minute, which I'm fine with.
Yeah. Any new books coming out soon? Any ideas?
There's some that sort of stuck in sort of development hell, but yeah, I'm sort of putting them on the back burner. But fingers crossed, something will happen soon.
Yeah. And where can people go if they want to find your work?
So yeah, I can plug my book, which is the Missing Lynx, which is in bookshops. I also have a podcast called Screens of the Stone Age with some academic colleagues, which is looking at depictions of prehistory in film, which is lots of fun. We have a blog looking at animals of the Pleistocene called Twilight Beasts, twilightbeasts.org. And yeah, I'm active on social media. So my handle on Blue Sky is at Deep Fried DNA. I try and share research and amusing thoughts when I can.
Brilliant. I'll leave a link to all of those in the show notes below. And thank you for joining me. Thank you for your time, and hopefully see and speak to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you very much.